Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the latest display of Putin's capture of Trump, who, after standing next to Zelensky at Mar-a-Lago, saying he was 95% on the way to a peace deal to end Russia's war on Ukraine, reversed himself after a call from Putin accepting the lie that Ukraine had struck one of Putin's residences, which Putin is using as an excuse to scuttle any peace deal, which he clearly has no interest in. Joining us is Olga Lautman, a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who is also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin File podcast series, which features expert discussions on the Kremlin's internal affairs, global operations and tactics used from their hybrid warfare toolkit to destabilize Western democracies. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe, with a focus on Russia's intelligence operations, available at olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest article we will discuss is Trump delivers a Christmas gift to Putin by targeting Europe's democracies. Then Sasha Linden Cohen interviews Luke Goldstein, an investigative reporter at The Lever. He was previously a writing fellow at the American Prospect, a reporter at the Washington Monthly, and served as a research associate at the Open Markets Institute. She will discuss Luke's recent article at The Lever, Google bankrolled secret summit for key state lawmakers. Then finally, with Marjorie Taylor Greene telling the New York Times Trump screamed at her for supporting the release of the Epstein files because, quote, "My friends will get hurt," with Melania possibly included in the list, we will go to one of the more impactful interviews of 2025 on the enduring scandal that, above all other outrages, might bring Trump down. We were joined on November the 24th by Anand, the author of the international bestseller Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World, a former foreign correspondent and columnist for the New York Times for more than a decade. He is also an on-air political analyst at MS Now. His latest book is The Persuaders at the Front Lines of the Fight for Hearts, Minds, and Democracy, and he has an article at the New York Times, How the Elite Behave When No One is Watching, Inside the Epstein Emails. And before we begin, as this year ends and you can make tax-deductible donations for 2025, I'm hoping you consider backgroundbriefing.org/donate and publictruthmedia.org for your charitable giving, since we produce a daily news analysis program covering the major stories in the news 5 days a week on a very modest budget, and have recently expanded our production team from 2 people, that's me and Graham, to 5 employees as we expand our social media presence and have a new Gen Z reporter to engage the future generation in a coalition of boomers and zoomers out to make America decent and sane again, and the world a better place for all. So happy holidays to you, and the very best in the new year as we expand our fact-based community in post-truth America. And joining us now is Olga Lautman, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe, where her latest article is Trump delivers a Christmas gift to Putin by targeting Europe's democracies. Welcome to Background Briefing, Olga Lautman.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm okay, although I'm mystified why the press and particularly our government, I mean, the Europeans get it, because every time that Trump meets with Putin, either Putin calls before he meets with Zelensky, he calls Trump, and then after Trump meets with Zelensky, he calls him and turns his head around. And, after the Zelensky meeting at Mar-a-Lago, both of them said we're 95% there, although Trump made this remarkable statement, which is completely bizarre, saying that Putin really is invested and wants the best for Ukraine while he's bombing the hell out of the place. So the pattern is clear. The Europeans think that, they can't believe that Trump keeps repeating the Kremlin's talking points. So at what point, Olga, do we accept the obvious? It's like that expression, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So at what point do we accept the fact that Putin seems to own Trump?
Well, I accepted that in 2017 after Russia did everything they could. I mean, they really, really ran a very complex, multifaceted operation to make sure that he gets installed into office, and he didn't fail to deliver. I mean, one of his first policies at that time, at least there were some guardrails and, some quote unquote adults in the room. But I mean, one of his first policies was how can we get out of NATO? And from there, he literally went on to deliver Russia a series of wins to weaken our transatlantic alliance. And it was only because he did not know about, the inner workings of government. And there were, the likes of John Kelly and others who were acting as a guardrail, that he didn't get away with what he's getting away now. But then, as with everything else, he was voted out in 2020, lost the election, and had a few years to be fully prepared not to make the same mistakes that he did when he came back. And now he doesn't need to act anymore. He doesn't need to even attempt to hide, his relationship with Russia, his love for Putin, and his operations on behalf of Russia, because at this point he's hijacked every single agency. We're not going to have, any kind of counterintelligence investigations on what Trump, his family, Witkoff, Kushner are getting for acting as puppets of the Kremlin regime. We, don't have a Department of Justice. And frankly, I mean, now he can actually be who he's always been very publicly because everything is under his control.
So does that mean then that obviously he wants to sell out Ukraine? So how's he going to do it? Because Putin has alleged that one of his residences was attacked by 91 Ukrainian drones. He refuses to show any evidence of it. But Trump seems to be sympathetic to Putin and said Putin called him after he met with Zelensky, and Putin was really mad about it. But everybody seems to agree that it didn't happen and that this is Putin's way of trying to get out from any kind of negotiation because Putin doesn't want to negotiate. He thinks he's going to win. And I think it's obvious to everybody. So the question would be then, is Trump, getting bad intel from Tulsi Gabbard, who the Russians refer to as our girlfriend, or does intel have nothing to do with this? This is just another example of how Putin owns Trump.
This is just another example of how Putin owns Trump. And since when, has Trump ever even looked for facts? Um, Clearly, our intelligence is not involved in briefing him. Tulsi, obviously would say whatever the Kremlin wants her to say, as long as it serves advantage to them, she will continue repeating. I mean, as we've seen all year, repeating Kremlin propaganda. But here, I mean, this attack is laughable. Nothing happened. Even people on Telegram who live near Putin's palace or residence didn't see any drones, any kind of air defense, nothing. They reported that they saw nothing. So, I mean, this clearly didn't happen. But this goes back to the bigger thing. Look, I told you in, I believe, January and all year, I've been repeating the same thing. We're going in circles. Trump is attempting to deliver Ukraine on a gold platter to Putin. He has done everything from, kicking Zelensky out of the White House and humiliating him to attacking our European allies, to then trying to sweet talk Zelensky, to then turning it into a business deal with Ukraine, to then again threatening Zelensky. And I mean, he's going in cycles that almost, is a reminder of abusive, violent boyfriends who go through, the stages of of a breakup. Um, so Trump is doing this, but you have Ukrainians who are the main people involved in this, and Ukrainians are not going to accept anything. If Zelensky were ever to agree to any kind of, ceding of land or any terms that the Ukrainians don't agree with, he will be pulled out of the presidential palace quicker than, you could finish saying his full name. So Ukrainians, especially after what the whole country has gone through over the past 4 years of daily bombardment, burying relatives out of rubble, and everything, sitting in the cold with no water, no power right now across the whole country. I mean, so we are continue going in these circles. Trump can do and give Putin what he wants. It is still ultimately up to the Ukrainians. And then you have to remember, this other continent, the Europeans, who also will not allow this because they understand that if Ukraine falls or if Ukraine hands territory to Russia, that will only allow Russia to basically speed up their planned attack on a NATO country. And Russia has been planning, and Russia is testing, NATO defenses every single day, and they will not stop. So Trump can do whatever he wants with Putin. You still have Ukrainians and the rest of Europe who have their own national security, you know, strategy, and they need to defend the whole continent. And that's it. And Europeans understand this. I think, they're finally waking up. And they just need to come to the realization that the United States is no longer an ally. At best, we are now going to be neutral. At worst, we can join Russia in attacking Europe. So, we could become there could be a scenario down the road where the Europeans are actually going to have to fight American forces, especially if Trump continues going down this, lane with threatening to seize Greenland. So Europeans really need to work their national security strategies around the fact that the United States is gone. I mean, that's it. The post-World War II is gone. It won't be back for a while. And frankly, it's going to take, generations for the rest of the world to trust America again. Because after what happened the first time, Trump came in and then Biden came and he strengthened our coalitions and alliances. So Europeans and the rest of the world said, okay, this was some kind of a strange blip, but Americans are the ones who brought him back. The Republican Party that was so supportive of Ukraine are the ones who are now staying silent, minus a handful, as Trump literally is acting as a unregistered agent of the Kremlin. And the rest of the world is watching this. We're not doing this in a vacuum on CNN. I mean, the world is watching every single move and acting accordingly.
But Zelensky says that the Ukraine cannot survive without America's help. So
Of, of
what?
course, you'll say that. Europeans will say the same thing because everyone, is trying to, for as long as they can, pacify Trump. But, Zelensky knows, Ukrainians know, America is gone. The Europeans too. I mean, you had I believe the NATO Secretary General who called Trump daddy. He knows that's not his daddy, and he knows that the United States is not only threatening to attack Greenland, basically attacking NATO territory, but is also making preparations for it. So, they're trying to pacify Trump as long as they can in order to to keep the situation as stable before it really goes off the rails.
But lately, Olga, Putin has been wearing military fatigues, And my understanding is that he's planning on a big offensive in April, and that he clearly does not want to make any peace deals. And Trump clearly, just the other day, Trump said on a hot mic, he complained about how he's ended 8 wars and he still can't get a Nobel Prize. So that's all Trump's focus is. He wants the prize. And Netanyahu just gave him the Israel Award. I mean, it's embarrassing that the hoops that people have to jump through to placate this 9-year-old insecure idiot. But this is what we have. And my understanding is that I just don't understand why people can't see the obvious, that Putin does not want to make a deal. And so you have this impasse. Trump wants a Nobel Prize. Putin thinks he's going to win in the end. So do you think that there'll be an offensive in the spring or even sooner? And
The
by the way,
Russians absolutely can try an offensive, but we've already seen their capabilities, which are frankly, laughable. What makes Russia dangerous is that they're extremely cruel. Normal militaries target military targets, whereas Russia's targets from day one have always been the people. They operate like Al Qaeda and ISIS, where the more people you target, the more you think you will break their will and force a surrender. But with Putin, when it comes to that, of course, Putin doesn't want any kind of plan. First of all, there is no plan to discuss. Russia invaded a sovereign country. If Canada invaded the United States, we would not, and see parts of, I don't know, Montana and South Dakota, we wouldn't be discussing, how which part should they keep, and should they keep all of South Dakota because they only took a third of it. We would be discussing how to get Canada, over that. Same thing with Mexico. Luckily, America has never had to have a real war in this country, minus the Revolutionary War, but the Civil War was internal. The United States, Americans have never been attacked from external forces. So there's nothing to negotiate. Russians came in, they know where their border is. If they wanted to end it, they could end it at any moment and leave Ukraine and go back to their damn country. It's not that it's, they don't have enough land. And that's it. Number two, Putin is not an idiot. Putin knows the history of Russia, back to Imperial Russia under the Tsars, and he knows that any kind of weakness of a leader, if they don't set out their bloody, imperialist conquest, if they're not successful, that they will be assassinated and they will be taken out of power. This has happened to every leader who has attempted to do the same, minus with Gorbachev, where just the whole country collapsed because they walked into Afghanistan, thinking, oh, it's only a bunch of caves and tribal people, what could go wrong. And that caused basically, it was one of the factors of several factors that caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. So Putin knows this. He knows the history of his predecessors. He cannot, he call it, after everything, tell the Russian people that say, we're done, we are finished, and I accomplished nothing, because he will be hanged in Red Square. Second, the economy is, really, really on the verge of collapse. Um, the only thing holding it up is that he has converted everything into a war economy. I believe 90% of it. If there is
mhm,
no war, the economy will collapse. So that he also understands what happens when the economy collapses.
right,
So Putin has absolutely zero intention of ending anything. If he wanted to, he would, like I said, he could leave today. This is
right.
really, Ukrainians aren't in Russia. It's the Russians in Ukraine. He can pack up his, thugs, recall them back, and that's it. And then we have peace. End of story. Ukrainians wouldn't even retaliate, even after the destruction, carpet bombing of cities, erasing of villages, all the mass graves across the country. If Russians left, they would be like, okay, let's start rebuilding.
Well, Olga, we've run out of time, but I appreciate you joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
And again, I've been speaking with Olga Lautman, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who's also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin's File podcast series, which features expert discussions on the Kremlin's internal affairs, global operations, and tactics used from their hybrid warfare toolkit to destabilize Western democracies. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe, with a focus on Russia's intelligence operations, available at olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest articles include Trump delivers a Christmas gift to Putin by targeting Europe's democracies. We're going to take a brief station break, and Sasha Linden Cohen will be back interviewing Luke Goldstein about how big tech is trying to stop states from regulating AI.
The warmth of your love's like the warmth from the sun, and this will be our year. Took a long time to come. Don't let go of my hand now, the darkness has gone. This will be our year. Took a long time to come, and I won't forget the way you held me up when I was down, and I won't forget the way you said, darling, I love you. You gave me faith to go on. Now we're there.
Welcome back. You're listening to Background Briefing. I'm Sasha Linden Cohen. Next up, we're turning to a subject that's been in the news a lot in recent weeks, legislation around artificial intelligence. We've heard a lot about this on the federal level because it's no secret that Trump is very much under the sway of a handful of Silicon Valley tech giants and seems to be heeding to their policy wishes. But today we're zooming in a bit to talk about how big tech is trying to influence AI regulation on the state level. And given Trump's recent executive order trying to bar states from introducing their own AI legislation, there are a lot of looming questions about how this will all play out. Luke Goldstein is an investigative reporter at The Lever, and he's joining us now to talk about his recent article, Google Bankrolled a Secret Summit for Key State Lawmakers. And I'll mention that Luke and I were actually on the student newspaper together in college, so it's a pretty full circle moment. Welcome back to the show, Luke.
Yeah, it's good to be back on Background Briefing with my old editor.
Absolutely. So I first wanted to ask about this quote unquote secret summit that you wrote about. Can you tell me what it was all about and how Google had pitched it to state legislators?
Yeah. So, yeah, Google kind of had this whole summit focused on state policy making that took place, earlier this fall at the end of October. And, it basically entailed a bunch of training sessions, and various kind of panels and social events that were all geared towards a bunch of kind of pressing policy topics, that are kind of core for, Google's bottom line. So those included artificial intelligence, the build out of data centers to power AI, and a few other topics like online privacy, and such. And the main guests at this state policy summit were a number of state lawmakers, who are currently actually legislating, on these very matters, and they were paid for their attendance directly by Google, upwards of about $2,000 for all-inclusive trips to travel to Chicago for this event. It included $500 a night hotel rooms, a whole night at Wrigley Field, which Google rented out, and sort of a variety of other perks. And they were in attendance there to listen to panels titled the value of data centers and the benefits of artificial intelligence, and how child privacy is core to YouTube, which is one of Google's own properties and such. And they didn't publicize anything about this event. There were invitations sent out to state lawmakers in September, and nothing really probably would have been known about this event. They kind of would have gotten away with it, I guess, so to speak, except that one of the only requirements for state lawmakers to receive what are called gifts is you have to just kind of basically disclose them to state ethics offices. So the way to think about this is it's kind of sort of a loophole in public corruption law. You cannot, a lobbyist, a corporate entity, can't pay a bribe to a lawmaker in exchange for explicit political, favors. But you can give general gifts. And if a lawmaker argues that a gift such as being reimbursed for an all-inclusive trip is in a general public interest or there's some educational component, it's more or less allowed by state laws. There's sort of a variety of restrictions and when you have to disclose this, but it's kind of considered above board. So, you have to present the whole agenda item for the event that you're going to, and, the whole purpose, which is, how, I sort of was tipped off to this story. And, I compiled a list of about 20 lawmakers that we know were in attendance at the summit, but, the list is probably much longer. It just hasn't officially been disclosed yet.
So I wonder, I mean, obviously this was planned before the executive order came out, but as you know, and I'll just remind our listeners that there was an executive order earlier in December that Trump issued, basically trying to prevent states from creating their own individual AI legislation. I'm curious whether or not like that conversation around that order and that investment on the part of the Trump administration or that desire on the part of the Trump administration was looming over this at all? Do people think that it has any teeth? Obviously, Google went through with this and, invested money and time into this, definitely small peanuts in the tech world, but I wonder if there's just anticipation that that won't really have any lasting impact on a practical level.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple things to say on this front. So, um, I spoke to a number of people for this story who've kind of tracked Google's general sort of, influence peddling strategies over the years. This is the first time, to anyone's knowledge, that Google has ever hosted a summit like this that's explicitly about, state policy making. And so I think you can read into this a bit about what their, intentions are. Basically, in the kind of big picture sense, for the entirety of the Trump administration, I don't think the tech companies have really been too worried about a federal crackdown, federal regulations. Still some lingering lawsuits on antitrust cases that they're dealing with, but there's never been a threat with a Republican-controlled Congress, and the White House of federal action. All of the regulation of the technologies, core to Google, namely now artificial intelligence and the Bill of Data Centers, the only regulations happening at the state level at this point. And really, with data centers, that's kind of the relevant, it's the relevant area. So I think, clearly Google's intuition here was that we need to focus on strapping up, the state lawmakers. And there have been, two really significant pushes this year. California, most recently, and New York passed AI safety legislation that sort of forced AI companies to sort of, put these kind of safety requirements into their models and report them. Google fought pretty hard against both of those. They've been launching a huge lobbying campaign across the country to try to beat back any efforts to, to regulate AI. And there's been this federal effort that's been ongoing at the same time to try to impose a moratorium that would nullify all of these state regulations on specifically artificial intelligence. First, it was in the tax bill, and then a number of other legislative packages this year, like the defense bill. And, the name mostly Republicans and kind of tech interests that were pushing for this were not successful. What they did get earlier this month was an executive order from the Trump administration to try to do exactly that, to try to stop states from passing further legislation that's being considered that would restrict AI. I think my general understanding is that there's somewhat shakier legal grounds for an executive order versus getting a law passed, through Congress. You even have Republican governors such as Ron DeSantis in Florida who blasted the executive order and said this is illegal. The federal level doesn't have authority to stop states from legislating our own matters. So I think that's yet to be seen. But clearly, Google's intention with this summit is to prepare for either scenario. We get a federal moratorium, and that's great, or we have to really try to make sure that California and New York don't become a model for the rest of the country to pass laws that aren't really in our best interests. That being Google's.
Absolutely. I wonder, you mentioned Ron DeSantis. I mean, he introduced this whole AI Bill of Rights, and that kind of included the whole scope of anxiety-inducing AI concerns, deepfakes, data collection, chatbots engaging with people in a creepy way. It included data centers and so on. And I wondered, I guess, if Google or any of these companies have a particular focus, especially when it comes to the states. Is it mainly the data centers and trying to encourage states to allow the continued building of data centers? Is it around, the sort of moral concerns, or are those moral concerns things that would have to be introduced on a federal level just because of the sort of technology and changing it in that way?
So I think generally Google's overall attitude has been less is more. I think overall they want a kind of light touch regulatory framework. So the worst case scenario really are the California and New York bills, which generally have taken is a little bit more of it. I guess you could say a heavier handed approach. There are just new requirements that AI companies have to report about testing that their AGI models aren't kind of getting into dangerous territory or various discrimination uses and things of that kind of nature. But every single state right now is working on their own version of AI legislation. Some is more heavy-handed, some is a little bit more kind of around the edges. And what Google has said publicly is they do not want this whole kind of unique patchwork of laws that vary by state because I guess it makes it harder for them to plan out their tech rollout for Gemini and their other artificial intelligence products. They want what they call a national framework that just overrides all of these state laws. I think what you can read into that is these are all kind of code words of Google saying we would like a federal moratorium on all the state rules, and then we can kind of back our own framework that we think would be more beneficial to our bottom line at the federal level and kind of be done with the whole thing.
I wonder also how it's playing out on partisan lines. Did you see any particular makeup of this event or them sort of targeting specific kinds of lawmakers from either party, from particular states? I wonder, I feel like this is an issue that hasn't really yet fallen under the purview of one party or another, kind of claiming AI regulation as their issue area. And I'm curious whether there's sort of a pitch to any particular party or any particular, interest in why they should deregulate or create legislation that is generous towards companies like Google.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, my takeaway from the list that I've compiled of who we know is in attendance at this Google State Summit is it was completely bipartisan. I mean, there are just as many Democrats who were there, as Republicans. I mean, I think, frankly, if anything, the one pattern you can see from, and this is going back further across Google's other lobbying operations, they've actually focused more probably on trying to sway Democrats because I think their impression is they just are on a little bit better ground with Republicans who are already kind of inclined to have a kind of lighter touch regulatory kind of mindset. They've been for a number of years more worried about trying to make sure Democrats remain kind of pro big tech. And I think that was kind of represented with the guest list that we know of at this summit. The backstory a little bit more is that Google has, for a number of years, been really aggressive in finding all kinds of ways to try to influence and sway lawmakers and avoid antitrust lawsuits, other efforts to regulate their business. They even focused for a whole kind of period on funding research centers. One was the law school at a university in Virginia called George Mason, the Antonin Scalia Law School, which was kind of their main hub for a bit, that would put on these training sessions for federal judges to educate and teach them about specifically antitrust law, because there was a whole kind of effort at that time to try to enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act against Google's monopoly. And they anticipated this by saying, well, we'll kind of get ahead of this, and we will make sure that we put the right ideas in the minds of federal judges who will then be overseeing these cases. What's new about this state summit, and I think this kind of just speaks to the sort of general political moment we're in, Google has given up all the pretenses of funding, a separate, neutral, independent, academic seeming entity to advocate on their behalf. They're just now directly paying state lawmakers for attendance at their events hosted by their own executives with their own lobbyists to, kind of wine and dine them and, try to, sway them in a policy direction that's more favorable to them.
Wow, so the curtains kind of come down.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we have to leave it there, but there's so much more to talk about, so hope to have you on the show soon. I've been speaking with Luke Goldstein. He's an investigative reporter at The Lever. He was previously a writing fellow at the American Prospect and a reporter at the Washington Monthly. And his recent article in The Lever is Google Bankrolled a Secret Summit for Key State Lawmakers. Thanks so much, Luke.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
We're going to take a brief station break. We'll be back with one of the more impactful interviews of 2025 on the enduring scandal that, above all the other outrages, might bring Trump down.
Once a year it's true, the people come to you, and everyone around the town feels the same way too. I know at times I just pretend you're something more than just a friend, and so we go outside and spend a little time.
And joining us now is Anand Giridharadas, who is the author of the international bestseller Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World, a former foreign correspondent and columnist for the New York Times for more than a decade. He is the publisher of the Inc. newsletter, and his latest book is The Persuaders, at the front lines of the fight for hearts, minds, and democracy. And he has an article in the New York Times, How the Elite Behave When No One is Watching, Inside the Epstein Emails. Welcome to Background Briefing, Anand Giridharadas.
Thank you for having me.
So you really nailed it, Anand, in terms of setting up your argument when you say that the rich and powerful in the social network of the convicted pedophile and sex trafficker Epstein were perhaps able to look away because they had learned to look away from so much other abuses and suffering, the financial meltdowns some of the networks helped trigger, the misbegotten wars some of the network pushed, the overdose crisis some of them enabled, the monopolies they defended, the inequality they turbocharged, the housing crisis they milked, and the technologies they failed to protect people against. So that is the world we live in, and is that our lot?
It's our condition. I don't know that it's our lot. Look. I'll say it bluntly, and then we can go back into the substance of the piece. But I think when I first heard about the Epstein story, and this goes back some time now, and I have different involvements with it because I was on an MIT prize jury that I resigned from because of MIT's ties to Jeffrey Epstein that it would not properly confront at the time. But when I first heard about this story, it was obviously, as it is at the heart, a story about a depraved man, a kind of monster in our society who did all these terrible things. And as the story has gotten more and more exposure, all these other names have sort of gotten dragged into it, whether it's Prince Andrew or an Alan Dershowitz or Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary, or Bill Gates, all these other people. And a lot of these people are people we don't necessarily or even at all think of as monsters. There's a lot of very eminent people, a lot of luminaries in these names that have emerged. And recently when the House Oversight Committee published thousands and thousands of Epstein's emails, there were more and more of these luminaries, Republicans, Democrats, Barack Obama's White House counsel, who was in the running to be his attorney general. People like this up and down the list, Deepak Chopra, Steve Bannon, Noam Chomsky, all kinds of people from all sides of things. And the question that started to be raised was, how could all these eminent people from Harvard and the Gates Foundation and American cabinet departments, how could they all been roped into dealing with this monster? And the more I read the emails, the less confusing the connection became to me. The more I read the emails, the more it seemed to me that a lot of these people, maybe not all of them, but a lot of these people in this powerful social network around him were actually quite able to look away at Jeffrey Epstein's crimes because they had had a ton of batting practice at looking away over years on issue after issue after issue. You could argue that looking away is the superpower of the American super elite. Looking away at economic pain, looking away at what technology does to obsolesce human beings, looking away when natural disasters hurt our community, looking away at climate change. So the idea that all these eminent people are sort of shocking us through their ability to consort with Epstein. In fact, these people are very, very good at becoming deaf by choice to the cries of those without power.
And do you think any of them, I mean, all of them must have known about Epstein pleading guilty in Florida in 2008?
Well, it wasn't a big secret. I don't personally know what each person knew, but it was not a big secret. And in this network, there was even some amount of joking around about it, in the sense that people were, talking about, he would kind of joke around about, don't, I better not go back to my old ways, my troubling old ways, my old habits. He was giving dating advice to former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, helping a married Harvard professor think about how to court some young woman economist that he was interested in courting. So there's this way in which, this group of people, I think, saw many things in him and he saw many things in them. And part of what I describe in the essay in the New York Times is what I called an omnidirectional capital exchange, right? Jeffrey Epstein himself needed a good bath, a scrub of prestige after his crimes and his enormous reputational plummet of coming back, as a sex offender. So he needed, rubbing shoulders with you and me, no offense, might not have helped the cause as much as, getting very world-renowned Harvard professors and Bill Gates to hang around you suddenly means, oh, you can't, how bad a guy could Jeffrey Epstein be if these guys would hang around him, right? So he affiliated himself clearly with lots of these big-name university kind of people and others, scientists and others. How bad could he be if he's hanging around with these eminent scientists? But what these people benefited from him, he was a kind of consummate host, always having people over, offering food, offering drink, offering connections, offering, and he would say to a Steve Bannon, come to my house for dinner, who would you like to meet? Who would you like to meet? Would you like to meet Obama's former White House counsel? Would you like to meet this person? Would you meet that person? So he was a connector. He gave, even as he was giving Larry Summers dating advice, he was giving Larry Summers' wife advice about how to contact Woody Allen. Now, you can figure that one out for yourself. So this was a world in which, above all, what was prized was information, non-public, proprietary intel about business, about trends. So these are people, I say in the piece, for the Times, that, if you and I are invited to dinner at someone's house, we might bring a bottle of wine and be done with it. This is a social network of super elites where you can't do that. You got to bring a little more than a bottle of wine, Ian. You got to bring a tip about some kind of business thing that people don't know about yet, or a really interesting counterintuitive prediction about AI. These are people and I've known people, I've even known some people in this network. These are people who only value other people to the extent that they have something to tell them, some information to give them that would allow them to have edge, as people in finance call it, in whatever it is they do, that would allow them to be more effective in their government job, maybe make some money trading. These are people who don't necessarily value people, as human beings sitting across from them, but value them as potential sources of information that can be of use to them. And again, that kind of culture of valuing people according to whether they can help you out, give you informational tip-offs, is of a piece with the ability to look away from Epstein's devaluing of human beings in the most profound ways.
In your article, Anand, you quote the email between Catherine Rumler, who was White House counsel to Obama and is now the chief lawyer at Goldman Sachs, where she says to Epstein she's going to New York and, quote, "I will then stop to pee at a gas station or a rest stop on the New Jersey Turnpike. We'll observe all of the people there who are at least 100 pounds overweight. We'll have a mild panic attack as a result of the observation, and we'll then decide that I'm not eating another bite of food for the rest of the day out of fear I will end up like one of these people." That is, of course, sickeningly elitist. But do you think the American public have, we're supposed to be an egalitarian society, for God's sake, but, we have this situation where you've got his co-defendant, who was obviously convicted much later than 2008, more recently. She just got moved from a prison where she was facing a 20-year sentence and to this Club Fed down in Texas. I think people are outraged by that. I mean, that is a really raw example of elitist privilege, because she's just as depraved, if not more depraved, than Epstein.
Well, I want to go back for a moment to the quote you read, Catherine Rumler, because it was funny reading through these emails. There's so many different types of blindness and complicity and even depravity in some of these emails. But Catherine Rumler as a character in this Epstein drama really, I don't know, she just stayed with me. Because, so you read that quote. I mean, what a dehumanizing way, right? Ending with these people. Here's you and I, Jeffrey Epstein and Catherine Rumler, powerful super elites, lawyer, financier, living in this stratosphere. And because my car needs gas, and kind of only because I need to refill it, I'll have to stop and see these people. Well, these people she was referring to are actually my people. They're the American people. And let's think about Catherine Rumler for a second more. Catherine Rumler was the White House counsel for Barack Obama. What is a White House counsel? It's a lawyer representing not the president personally. It's the lawyer representing the American presidency, which is the presidency that belongs to the people at that rest stop. It's rare to get a glimpse of how so many of the people representing us in that and other ways see us. I think a lot of people suspect, feel somehow, intuit that that's how they're seen. But this is someone who was the lawyer, the attorney for the American presidency, whose salary was paid by, yes, these people at a rest stop in New Jersey. many of whom I would suspect worked 3 jobs to be able to afford to stop at the rest stop, fill up gas, and maybe get a bite to eat. And in this economy, maybe they had to choose, some of these people, between getting the bite to eat and filling up the gas. Maybe they bought their kids something at the rest stop and not themselves. And part of why that might have been the case is the Obama White House that she served in was quicker to bail out the banks than regular people. And if you look at the wealth graph, regular people never really recovered their wealth for years after that. It was a turning point in our economy, as you know. Years later, Catherine Rumler is on these emails with Epstein. Should I take this job? Should I take that job? Should I take the job as Attorney General? Eventually, she ends up at Goldman Sachs. And I'm spinning out this story because I think it's really important to understand this. She ends up being the chief lawyer for Goldman Sachs. So first of all, you got to understand, it's so normal to us that someone who would be a lawyer for the American presidency would become a lawyer for Goldman Sachs. So now think about, how are you doing that job when you're in the American presidency in the hope that one day you might be able to get a job, like the job at Goldman Sachs? And what are you now doing at Goldman Sachs knowing how the insides of government work? Why do we treat that revolving door as normal? And why is it that someone with that kind of mentality about these people, well, that person is no longer representing the presidency. She's now in a bank that has the power to shape how our markets work, how your employer works, how your mortgage works. When Goldman bet the way it did in the run-up to the financial crisis, it helped make it worse. And so I'm picking on one example out of possibly many that could be picked on, where we are getting a glimpse into the utter contempt that so many in our leadership class have for those they would lead, those who they are stewards of. And all I can say is, when you get that glimpse, heed Maya Angelou and believe them.
But do you think the American people, for example, that's I brought up the case of Ghislaine Maxwell getting all these privileges. I think that's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. But we are an egalitarian, at least allegedly an egalitarian society. But people in this country, at least 77 million, re-elected a guy that basically represents the billionaire class, even though he pretended to care about the average people. That somehow they still haven't figured that one out. At least a lot of people haven't figured that one out. So where would you gauge the American people in terms of how much they realize that these people have absolute contempt for them? And
I think people are waking up, but it's a difficult thing because look, in this country, and I think it is an unusual feature of the United States. A lot of things, are universal, and a lot of political dynamics are universal. But if you have to really pick something that is quite peculiar to the United States, it is that, a lot of people seem to believe they are billionaires in waiting. That a lot of people feel like even when they're hard up and struggling and not able to put food on the table, they don't necessarily identify with those who would, offer them justice. They identify with those who would help them too become so rich as to leave problems like that in the faintest, traces of memory. And yet I think this is changing in this country. And when you look at, frankly, even Donald Trump winning a second time in 2024, it was, on the strength of a sense that the political establishment has failed. Now, unfortunately, people, from my point of view, were misled into thinking that he would be an antidote to that, even though he's the poison and a perfect embodiment of the establishment that he pretends he's fighting. But I think if you look more hopefully at the election of Zohran Mamdani in New York, but not only there, you see around the country a rejection of this kind of elite insider class that is that really views the people below them as these people. And the Epstein story, we have to remember, and part of why I spent 4 or 5 days reading virtually all of these emails, one after another, in order to write this piece in the New York Times, is that these emails, I think this story has landed for the public and for a broader swath of the public than most stories now do. This story has alienated lots of people on the right. This story has split MAGA in a way that I'm not sure any story has split MAGA since Donald Trump came on the scene. This story is very powerful because we can all disagree about tax rates or tariffs or any number of other things. But this basic sense that there is this group of people who disrespect us and prefer the company of a convicted sex offender like Jeffrey Epstein to the mere sight of regular people at a rest stop. It's so upsetting, and it hopefully wakes people up to the reality that there are other ways of organizing our society than outsourcing decisions about our future to people who hate us.
And in terms of the network, you write that the emails depict a group whose highest commitment is to their own permanence in the class that decides things. When principles conflict with staying in the network wins. And the defense that you get from this elite is that how dare you, accuse us of us hardworking people of our just rewards, and that you're instigating a form of class warfare. But isn't the reality that they have won the war and that we're all POWs?
Yeah, I think the idea of class warfare is always so interesting because I'm not sure who began the war and who won it and whether it's even still going on. I think the people in these emails who I spent time with through their correspondence, uh, it seems like they did very well in whatever class war there was. It seems like they very much ended up the victors, emailing each other about the spoils and how to enjoy them. Sometimes some of them on a private island belonging to Jeffrey Epstein. Um, I think the question is not about war, but about who wins the peace, who wins the aftermath of their war, and what does it take to imagine a society in which it doesn't have to be this way. And I think the women who have come forward as Epstein's survivors and the survivors of others show us the way. They show us the way in such a powerful and simple way because they insist on telling the truth, which is what a lot of these people don't like. They insist on um, having courage and taking a moral stand, which is something a lot of these super elites reject. But above all, they insist on a very simple idea, Ian, which is the idea of a country that listens when people on the wrong end of power tell you something. Say they're hurt. Say they're being rattled by the way this economy works. Say they're being endangered, their livelihoods endangered by technology. Or yes, in the ultimate cases, say that they are being raped, abused, trafficked. The thing that we know from so much social science research is that looking away from some things trains you to look away from other things. You know this research that if you look at a lot of these mass shooters, you start digging into them once they come on the radar because of a mass shooting. You know what you often have beforehand? Domestic violence cases against them back in the day, right? Turns out people train themselves to inflict mass pain by creating pain on a smaller, more intimate scale first. Well, similarly, I think people train themselves to look away from truly monstrous crimes by learning to look away at all other manner of moral infractions, from the petty to the grander to the ultimately horrid.
And just in the last minute here, Anand, do you think, in terms of the women that you brought up, the victims, do you think we'll get the list? Because that, to me, is the ultimate test.
I don't know. I don't know if we'll get the list. I don't know what form these things take. I think what we are already getting in these emails and in the other files that have been released is a glimpse of not just one man in a basement or even a president who might have been affiliated with him in this or that way. We're getting a glimpse of a class of people that sits astride this society with impunity. And they have impunity when they drag our kids into wars that should never have been fought and those kids die. They have impunity when they bail out those banks instead of people. They have impunity when city of New Orleans doesn't get the help it needs after a hurricane. They have impunity when they fail us during a pandemic. They have impunity when they fail to protect us from technologies and things like AI that imperil our society. And they have impunity when some of them are complicit in or knowledgeable about or even actively engaged in the abuse of children. It is all impunity, all the way up. And that, to me, is what this case is about. And that's what people need to wake up to and insist on the possibility of changing.
Well, Anand, Giridharadas, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Anand Giridharadas, who is the author of the international bestseller Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World, a former foreign correspondent and a columnist for the New York Times for more than a decade. He's the publisher of the Inc. newsletter, and his latest book is The Persuaders at the Front Lines of the Fight for Hearts, Minds, and Democracy. And he has an article at the New York Times, How the Elite Behave When No One is Watching, Inside the Epstein Emails. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
One more light goes out.